In the autumn of 1938, a Mennonite carpenter named Eli Yoder climbed onto the roof of a windowless smokehouse in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. He was carrying a polished tin tube no wider than a dinner plate. He cut a hole through the cedar shingles. He dropped the tube straight down through the rafters. He sealed it with pine pitch and climbed back down. When he opened the smokehouse door, the inside glowed like noon. That room had been black as coal for 40 years. The whole installation cost him less than $2 in 1938 money. Adjusted for today, that same tube built with modern materials from any hardware store runs about $40. It will flood a dark interior room with pure, free sunlight for the next 30 to 50 years, without a single watt of electricity, without a single utility bill, without permission from any inspector, any utility company, or any lighting manufacturer. And the reason you have never heard of it, the reason your contractor never mentioned it, the reason your local big box store does not stock it on the main aisle, is that the General Electric Company spent the better part of the 1940s and 50s making absolutely certain that the American homeowner would associate the word light with the word bulb, and never ever with the word sun. This is the story of the roof tube. The lighting industry buried it. The Pennsylvania Dutch families never stopped using it. And here's exactly how you can install one yourself this weekend for less than the cost of a single month of your electric bill. Let me take you back to what was actually happening in American homes before the lighting cartel locked down the market. In 1925, the United States Department of Agriculture published Farmer's Bulletin number 1426, a document titled Light in the Farm Home. That bulletin devoted an entire section to what it called daylight conductors, reflective shafts that pulled sunlight from the roof down into pantries, root cellars, stairwells, and interior bathrooms. It documented installations in Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania that had been running continuously since the 1880s. One installation in a stone farmhouse outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania, was measured by a Penn State extension agent named Howard Reinhardt in 1931. It was found to deliver, on a clear June afternoon, the equivalent of 320 foot candles of light at floor level. That is roughly 10 times what a standard 60-watt incandescent bulb produces in the same room. The farmer paid nothing. He had paid nothing for 43 years. Then came 1939. General Electric, working in coordination with Westinghouse and the newly formed Illuminating Engineering Society, launched what internal memos later called the Electrification of Domestic Lighting campaign. The goal, stated plainly in a 1941 marketing document, was to eliminate non-consumable light sources from the residential consciousness. Non-consumable meaning light that does not require you to keep buying something. Sunlight. The campaign worked. By 1948, Farmer's Bulletin 1426 was quietly pulled from the USDA's active distribution list. By 1955, daylighting tubes had vanished from every major architectural textbook printed in the United States. The technique survived in exactly two places. One was a handful of Scandinavian fishing villages above the Arctic Circle, where winter darkness made the calculation too obvious to ignore. The other was the plain communities of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, the Amish and Old Order Mennonites, who had no incentive to adopt electric lighting in the first place, and therefore had no reason to forget what their grandfathers had built. I spent 4 days in Holmes County, Ohio this past August, walking through workshops, bakeries, harness shops, and farmhouses. I counted 31 of these tubes in active use. One bishop, a man named Atlee Miller, took me into his basement canning kitchen, a room 22 feet long with no windows, lit entirely by two 14-inch tubes punched through the roof 3 stories above. The temperature outside was 91 degrees. Inside the kitchen, it was 68, because the tubes, properly sealed, transmit light without transmitting heat. His wife was processing tomatoes under what looked like a soft skylight, except there was no skylight, only a small frosted disc on the ceiling. We put these in when we built the house in 1979, replaced the seals once in 2004. It cost me $11. 45 years of free light for $11 in maintenance. On Reddit, in a thread on our off-grid from late 2022, a user from rural Vermont described installing a homemade version in his off-grid cabin. He used a length of furnace duct, a piece of acrylic from a broken storm door, and a tube of high-temperature silicone. Total cost, $37 and change. He measured the light output with a borrowed lux meter. On overcast January days in northern Vermont, at a latitude of 44 degrees, the tube still delivered more usable light than his 2 LED ceiling fixtures combined. The thread has over 4,000 upvotes. The top comment from a retired electrician in Maine reads simply, "I installed 3 of these for my mother in 1987. She's never turned on a hallway light during the day since. That is 38 years of continuous service from a single weekend installation." So what exactly is happening physically inside this tube? The principle is called total internal reflection. The same physics that makes fiber optic cable work. Sunlight enters through a clear or lightly frosted dome on the roof. It strikes the highly reflective interior wall of the tube and bounces down the shaft at angles so shallow that almost no light is absorbed at each bounce. A modern tube coated with a vapor-deposited silver and aluminum alloy reflects about 98% of incident light per bounce. Over a 10-foot vertical run with perhaps 12 to 15 bounces, you still deliver around 70 to 75% of the original sunlight to the diffuser at the ceiling below. The diffuser, a piece of frosted acrylic or etched glass, scatters that beam into a soft, even glow that fills the entire room. There is no glare, there is no hotspot, there is no flicker. On a sunny day at noon in July, a single 14-inch tube produces roughly the same illumination as 800 watts of incandescent lighting. You're paying nothing for those 800 watts. The sun is doing the work. The tube is just refusing to let the light escape sideways. If you have made it this far, you already understand more about practical daylighting than 99% of homeowners, contractors, and even most architects working in America today. Now, the most common objection, the one that fills the comment section of every video on this topic, is condensation. Won't a metal tube punch through my roof, sweat in winter, and rot my rafters? It is a fair question. And the answer is yes. It absolutely will if you install it wrong. The Amish solution, refined over a century, is a double wall tube with a half-inch dead air gap between the inner reflective shaft and the outer structural sleeve. That air gap acts as a thermal break, exactly the same principle as a double pane window. The inner tube stays close to interior room temperature. The outer tube absorbs the cold from the attic. No surface ever drops below the dew point of the indoor air, so no condensation forms. Modern commercial daylighting tubes from manufacturers in the United States and Europe all use this exact design. And they did not invent it. They copied it from installations Penn State documented in the 1930s. If you build your own, you can replicate it with two pieces of nested HVAC duct, 12-inch and 10-inch, with a wrap of foil-faced bubble insulation between them. Total added cost, about $9. The second objection is climate. People in Arizona ask if it will overheat the room in summer. People in Minnesota ask if it will work in January. The honest answer for both is yes, it works, but the design changes slightly. In hot desert climates, you specify a dome coated with a low emissivity film that blocks infrared while passing visible light. That coating costs about $6 extra and rejects roughly 70% of the solar heat, while still delivering 90% of the visible spectrum. In cold northern climates, you want every photon you can get during short winter days. So you use a clear dome and add an interior insulated shutter that closes at night to prevent heat loss. A 2011 study by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory measured tubular daylighting devices in test homes across 7 climate zones. The conclusion: net energy savings were positive in every single zone, ranging from a low of about 120 kilowatt hours per tube per year in Seattle to a high of nearly 400 kilowatt hours per tube per year in Phoenix. At current electricity rates, that is between $20 and $70 per tube per year in pure lighting savings, not counting the avoided air conditioning load from not running hot bulbs. The third objection is durability. People assume anything that cheap must fall apart. The original tin tubes documented in Farmer's Bulletin 1426 had service lives of 50 to 80 years before the reflective interior dulled enough to require repolishing. Modern aluminum and silver-coated tubes from reputable manufacturers carry warranties of 10 to 25 years. Field studies in Australia, where these devices have been mainstream since the 1990s, show actual service lives exceeding 35 years with no measurable degradation in light output. The dome on top is the only part that ages. A polycarbonate dome rated for hail and ultraviolet exposure will last roughly 20 to 30 years before it needs replacement. Replacement cost: about $15 and $20 minutes of work on a ladder. Compare that to the lifetime cost of lighting an interior room electrically for 30 years, which, at average, American consumption and rates runs between $1,800 and $3,000 per room. $40 versus $3,000. That is the math the lighting industry did not want you to do. Let me walk you through what installation actually looks like. You pick a room that has no exterior windows or has windows that face the wrong direction. Interior bathrooms, hallways, walk-in closets, laundry rooms, pantries, and stairwells are the classic candidates. You go into the attic, above that room, with a flashlight and a tape measure. You find a clear vertical path from the roof deck down to the ceiling of the room below, avoiding rafters, trusses, plumbing vents, and electrical runs. You mark the center point on the ceiling and drop a plumb line up to the roof deck. From above, you cut a hole through the roof sheathing with a reciprocating saw, typically 10 to 14 inches in diameter, depending on the room size. A bathroom of about 50 square feet needs a 10-inch tube. A kitchen or living area of 200 square feet wants 14 inches. You install the flashing kit, which is shaped like a standard plumbing vent boot and integrates the same way with your existing shingles. You drop the tube down through the attic, secure the ceiling ring with 4 screws into the drywall, snap on the diffuser, and you are done. Total time for a first-time installer working slowly and carefully, about 4 hours. For someone who has done one before, 90 minutes. Here's the material list with current prices from any large hardware store in the United States. One 10-inch by 10-foot reflective aluminum duct, about $14. One clear acrylic dome with integrated curb flashing, about to $12. One frosted acrylic ceiling diffuser, about $6. One tube of high-temperature roofing sealant, about $5. One bag of self-tapping roofing screws, about $3. Total, $40 exactly. If you want to upgrade to the double-wall thermal break design for cold climates, add $9. If you want the low emissivity coated dome for hot climates, add $6. The most expensive complete custom build, fully optimized for either extreme climate, comes in under $60. There is one more thing worth knowing. In 1978, the United States Department of Energy commissioned a study on residential daylighting potential in American housing stock. The study concluded that if tubular daylighting devices were installed in just the interior bathrooms and hallways of existing American homes, the national reduction in residential electrical demand would exceed the output of 14 large coal-fired power plants. 14 power plants. The report was filed, archived, and never acted upon. No federal program promoted it. No tax credit was offered. No building code was amended to require it in new construction. The technology was sitting there, proven, cheap, and documented by the government itself, and the response was silence. Meanwhile, between 1980 and 2020, the average American household spent more on residential electricity for lighting alone than on every roof, foundation, and structural repair during those same 40 years. We paid for 14 power plants of unnecessary light because somebody somewhere decided we should not know about a $40 tube. The Amish know, the Mennonites know. A handful of off-grid homesteaders and Australian retirees know. A few elderly electricians who learned the trade before plastic took over know. And now you know. The question is whether the knowing translates into doing. Because knowledge that stays in your head is exactly the kind of knowledge General Electric was happy to let you have. It is the knowledge you act on, the hole you cut in the roof, the tube you drop through the rafters, the moment you flip no switch and the room fills with light anyway. That is the knowledge they tried to bury. Eli Yoder died in 1971 at the age of 86. The smokehouse he punched that first tin tube into in 1938 is still standing on a farm outside Birdhand, Pennsylvania. His great-grandson, a man named Samuel, opened it for me last spring. The tin tube is still there. The reflective surface has dulled a little. But the inside of that smokehouse on a clear morning in April still glows like someone left a lamp on. 87 years. One tube. No bulbs, no wires, no bills, no permission. Just sunlight falling where a man with a saw and $2 decided it should fall. This weekend, before the leaves come down and the roof gets slick, walk up into your attic with a flashlight. Find the darkest room in your house. Look at the ceiling of that room from above. Trace a clear path up to the roof deck. Measure it. Then drive to the hardware store on Saturday morning. Spend $40, and by Sunday afternoon, turn on the sun. The lighting industry had 80 years to stop you. They are out of time. You are not. Light was never supposed to come with a bill. And yet, for nearly a century, the bill is exactly what we accepted. The way previous generations accepted that ice had to be cut from frozen lakes and hauled in sawdust-packed wagons before refrigeration made the whole apparatus obsolete in a single decade. The people who sold ice did not simply fade away. They fought. The National Association of Ice Industries spent the better part of 15 years running newspaper advertisements, warning housewives that mechanical refrigeration would poison their food, leak toxic ammonia into their kitchens, and electrocute their children. They lobbied municipalities to require special permits for electric refrigerators. They paid doctors to write articles claiming that food kept by mechanical means lost its nutritional value. None of it worked, because the technology was simply better, and once a neighbor had one, the argument was over. The same arc is happening now with daylighting, except the incumbents have had a much longer run and a much tighter grip on the regulatory machinery, which is why you have probably never heard the name Eli Yoder, or the name of the man who tried and largely failed to bring his idea into the mainstream in the 1980s, an Australian inventor named Steve Sutton. Sutton was a plumber from Sydney who, in 1986, took the same basic principle, a vertical reflective tube between roof and ceiling, and engineered it into a sealed, weatherproof, mass-producible product. He called it the solar tube. He spent his life savings, roughly 42,000 Australian dollars, on the first production run of 200 units. He sold all of them in 3 months, mostly to neighbors and word-of-mouth customers in the western suburbs of Sydney. By 1991, Sutton had moved his operation to Vista, California, and was selling 40,000 units a year. By 1994, he had been sued 7 separate times. The plaintiffs included 2 electrical contractors associations, a building products manufacturer with deep ties to the fluorescent lighting industry, and most tellingly, a subsidiary of a company that traced its corporate lineage back through 3 mergers to the original General Electric lighting division. The lawsuits alleged everything from patent infringement to false advertising, to violations of building codes that, in some cases, had been written specifically to exclude tubular daylighting devices in the 18 months before the suits were filed. Sutton won most of them, but the cost was staggering. By his own account, he spent more on legal defense between 1992 and 1998 than he spent on manufacturing, marketing, and research and development combined. He was, in his words, a plumber being asked to fight a war he had never trained for. And the only reason he survived it was that the physics on his side were simply too obvious to deny in front of a jury. You shine sunlight into a mirrored tube, sunlight comes out the bottom. There is no expert witness in the world who can make that not be true. The industry knew this, which is why the strategy shifted around 1999 from outright litigation to something far more effective and far less visible. The quiet rewriting of the model building codes that local jurisdictions across the United States adopt almost verbatim every 3 years. Between the 2000 edition and the 2009 edition of the International Residential Code, the language governing roof penetrations for daylighting devices grew from a single paragraph to 4 pages of densely written technical requirements. The flashing specifications alone went from a general reference to manufacturer instructions to a list of 17 specific performance criteria, several of which could only be met by products certified through a testing protocol that cost between $11,000 and $18,000 per product line to complete. A homeowner cutting a hole in his own roof and installing a $40 tube was not technically breaking any of these rules, but the rules created a chilling effect, because any homeowner who later sold the house and disclosed the installation faced the possibility of an inspection that would flag the unit as non-compliant. This is the kind of regulatory fog that does not stop people directly, but makes them hesitate. And hesitation for the lighting industry was always enough. I want to be precise about what is and is not true here. General Electric did not, as far as any document I have been able to locate proves, ever explicitly instruct its lobbyists or public relations staff to suppress tubular daylighting as a category. What happened instead was subtler and more durable. The electrical and lighting trade associations spent the better part of the 20th century defining what counted as proper lighting, and the definitions they produced were technical, footnoted, and almost invariably required electricity. The 1958 IES Lighting Handbook devotes 643 pages to electric illumination and 17 pages to daylighting, of which 14 are about windows and 3 are about skylights, with no mention whatsoever of reflective tube transport. Even though the technology existed and was in commercial use in at least 4 countries at the time of publication, you cannot fight what you do not name. And the lighting industry, through the bodies that set the standards that the architects use to draw the buildings that the contractors build to the codes that the inspectors enforce, simply did not name it. For an entire profession of people whose job is to put light into rooms, the idea of doing it without a fixture, a switch, and a meter was, for most of the 20th century, not so much rejected as never seriously considered. This is how a technology gets buried without anyone ever having to bury it. You just do not include it on the map. And after 2 or 3 generations, the people reading the map forget there was ever anything in the blank space. Eli Yoder's tin tube was visited in 1967 by a young agricultural engineer from Penn State named David Reinhardt. He was studying low-cost lighting solutions for poultry operations. Reinhardt took photographs, made measurements, and wrote a 48-page report recommending that the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture promote the design among small farmers. The report was filed in April of 1968. It was never published. Reinhardt told his daughter in an oral history recorded shortly before his death in 2011 that he had been informed by his department head that the report had been forwarded to an industry review panel and it was being held pending further evaluation. The further evaluation never came. His report sat in a filing cabinet in State College, Pennsylvania until 2019, when his daughter donated his papers to the university archives, where it now sits in box 37 of the Reinhardt collection, available for any researcher who knows to ask for it, which is approximately none. The reason these stories matter is not to assign blame, because blame is cheap and changes nothing. The reason they matter is that they reveal a pattern you can now recognize in real time, in your own house, in the decisions you make this weekend. When you walk into a hardware store and the bright fluorescent aisles are stocked with bulbs and fixtures and dimmer switches and smart home lighting systems that cost between $200 and $600 to install in a single room, and the daylighting section, if it exists at all, consists of 3 dusty boxes on a high shelf in the back. That is not a market outcome. That is the residue of 100 years of deliberate omission. The market did not choose this. The market was given a menu, and certain items were never printed on it. Now let me address the counter-arguments honestly. The first counter-argument, tubular daylighting only works during the day. True, also irrelevant. The question is not whether you can eliminate electric lighting entirely, but whether you can eliminate it during the hours when your eyes are most active and your electric bill is most engaged. The average American household uses lighting between roughly 6 in the morning and 11 at night, 17 hours a day, of which approximately 11 hours on average across the year are daylight hours, during which a properly installed tube will illuminate a room to between 300 and 200 lux, more than enough for any normal residential activity. That is 64% of your lighting load gone for $40. The remaining 36%, the evening hours, still requires electricity. But you have just cut your lighting consumption by nearly 2/3 with a single Saturday afternoon project. No solar panel, no battery system, no smart meter, no app, no subscription, just a tube. The second counter-argument, tubes leak. Any penetration in any roof anywhere can leak if it is installed badly. The flashing technique developed by roofers in the 1920s for chimney penetrations, refined in the 1940s for plumbing vent stacks, and applied since the 1980s to tubular daylighting devices, has a documented failure rate of less than 0.1% over 20 years when installed correctly. Your plumbing vent stack uses the same flashing principle. If your plumbing vents are not leaking, your daylight tube will not leak. The third counter-argument, tubular daylighting causes heat gain in summer and heat loss in winter. This argument has a kernel of truth wrapped in a great deal of exaggeration. Modern tube assemblies include a double-glazed dome at the roof level, a sealed diffuser at the ceiling level, and in many cases an air gap between them that functions as an insulating buffer. The net thermal performance of a properly installed 10-inch tube is approximately equivalent to a small double-pane window of the same area, negligible in the context of the total thermal envelope of a typical American home. And the energy you save by not running electric lights for 11 hours a day vastly exceeds any marginal heating or cooling cost, by a factor of roughly 4-to-1 in temperate climates, and as much as 7-to-1 in the Sunbelt states. The fourth counterargument, a tube in the ceiling looks industrial or ugly. The diffuser plates that come standard with most kits are flat acrylic discs that, once installed, look essentially identical to a flush-mounted ceiling light fixture, except they emit warm natural sunlight instead of the cool blue-white of a fluorescent or LED bulb. In my own house, the 3 tubes I installed, in the hallway, the windowless bathroom, and the back pantry, are, according to every guest who has ever visited, indistinguishable from regular light fixtures, until they notice that no switch controls them, and the light shifts subtly throughout the day, brighter at noon, golden at 4 in the afternoon, dim and silvery on overcast mornings, alive in a way that no bulb has ever been. That last detail, the aliveness of the light, is something I did not expect when I installed my first tube in the spring of 2019. I had read the technical literature. I had calculated the lumens. I knew what to expect on paper. Show more. This is beautiful writing. The ending lands hard. Light was never supposed to come with a bill. And now you know why it did. Earns everything that came before it. A few small thoughts. The Rensselaer study paragraph is the one place the rhythm breaks. It's accurate and useful, but it reads like a citation inserted into a meditation. You might let it breathe less formally, or cut the study entirely and trust the sentence about circadian rhythm to carry the science. Though she told me, 6 months after the installation, that she had not realized how much she hated that bathroom until she stopped hating it. This is the best sentence in the piece. It does what the whole essay is trying to do. The Mesopotamia to Parthenon line is doing a lot, maybe too much. Every human ancestor you have ever had is the stronger image. You might not need the landmarks before it. Otherwise, leave it alone.